Good morning. Welcome to all of our friends, members and associates. This is the fourth in our series of Artists Beyond the Studio talks that we've been organising during lockdown. And I have to say we're very pleased with the response that we've gotten to the talks. It's lovely to see so many people coming and the lovely feedback that we're getting. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to one of our newest members at Graphic Studio Dublin. Michele Hetherington is a multidisciplinary artist from Dublin. While studying for her Masters in Fine Art at NCAD, she completed the etching classes at Graphic Studio Dublin, and she became a member here in 2018. Since graduation, Michele has exhibited at Palace Projects, Graphic Studio Gallery and Lismore Castle, as well as a solo exhibition in November 2019 at Swords Castle. Her work incorporates drawing, photography, painting, video, sound installation alongside her printmaking. I've seen Michele's printmaking practice develop at Graphic Studio Dublin over the past few years, and she has embraced the rigours of the process in this short time. She's employed etched line, aquatint, spitbite, dry point and carborundum to achieve poetic, abstract pieces that manage to maintain some of the immediacy of her notebook work. In 2020, Michele began to work in the studio on some edition projects as part of Graphic Studio's commissions and visiting artist programs. This has provided her with experience working alongside artists, printers and master printers to further hone her skills. I'm interested in hearing about how Michele has found this transition from student to professional artist and how Graphic Studio Dublin and her printmaking practice fits in with her wider artistic practice. Often we see only one facet of our members' work processes, as so much other stuff happens outside the studio. Michele is a prime example of this, and I'm intrigued from following her on Instagram by her prolific notebook work, paintings and photography, which explore timekeeping, rhythms and mark making. I want to hear more about what Michele gets up to when she's not making prints at Graphic Studio Dublin.
I will start off with the very first installation that really struck me and has stayed with me that I created in UCD. So Fermat's Piano is what it was called, and it was a collaboration project with Emer O'Boyle, who is the resident artist in UCD, and she had a program called Tunneling. And tunneling was basically a connection between artists and scientists and science students. And this, I didn't know it at the time, but from kind of reflecting, it really, really impacted on my process and my practice as a whole. So I was paired up with two science students, one theoretical physicist, and the other was physics with astronomy and space science, which was incredible because even though science and art, they're both exploring, different things and new ideas, and the thinking that kind of between the two minds is very, very, very different. So it was really, really interesting to work with these two students. And we ended up making this installation here, Fermat's Piano. And basically what the concept behind it was to do with Fermat, who was a 17th century physicist who basically proposed the principles governing the paths of light rays. And so the piece was basically a concept adapting simple kind of geometrical optics and how light travels in a straight line. So it was actually suspended throughout the staircase of UCD. And if you kind of were walking around the space, you wouldn't necessarily notice it. It was only until you looked up that you really noticed kind of these kind of small, really, really fine, thin lines. And it illuminated then when the sun shone on it. So it was extremely delicate, very, very minimal. It was actually made up of 5 kilometers of clear wire. Then it also had 28 retort clamps, borrowed kindly from the science lab. And basically this was my very first installation, but also an introduction into performance. And it wasn't necessarily a performance piece, but the installation for me became a performance. We did it over 3 or 4 days, and it was repetitive, constant up and down stairs, threading, back down, up and down. And that performance piece, or that kind of install method, stuck with me. And I didn't know why at the time, but it definitely did. So I was at the time in undergrad printmaking. I had only made a very small amount of print works because I was in the 3-year degree. So the first year you kind of explored everything of fine art, and then you broke down into your second year into the technical aspects of print, and then third year you did your own self-directed. So I did very little up to this point of printmaking itself, and so the minimalism of this piece actually influences the rest of my work. So I'm going to go on then to my undergrad piece. This consisted of 6 really large scale photography pieces and a sound and video installation. The kind of concept had been brought then from Fermat's piano about repetition and time, performance, and then I had also integrated the landscape into it because I started doing readings to do with the landscape and how it's actually a metaphor for the subconscious. So I started to kind of think of it a little bit more, the landscape more, and performance and how they integrate. So the photographs were there, but what happened was I actually became more and more interested in the performative video and sound elements. So I actually then applied for, I kind of felt like I didn't have enough time in the undergrad. I just felt like the course was too short to really expand on what I really wanted to get out of college. So I signed up for the master's. And the video and sound piece for my undergrad was the springboard and the entrance into my master's studies. As I mentioned, I do a lot of sound installation, but for the purpose of Zoom, I don't feel like it's really right to share sound installation, especially site-specific sound installation over Zoom, just for quality purposes and stuff. So just bear with me then. So I went into the master's with, again, this idea of repetition, performance. And this is from my studio in the master's, and it was a performance piece called Continuum. And basically it had no start or finish. It was a loop of me constantly going in circles and circles. And this actually sparked off a very meditative type of practice where repetition and meditation in ways started to really develop, and with the idea of time and psychological time. So I began reading quite a lot of scientific journals, scientific studies, which really stays with me today. So I kind of base a lot of my work or projects off something I've read, and then I go and I take that on with me. So Time Is was another performance piece that I did for the master's, which was then subsequently shown in Palace Projects as part of a 2-person show with Elaine Granger. And basically this piece was created off the concept of a study that I had read. It was a study of a French scientist, again a scientist, and it was conducted in 1964, where he basically went into a cave underground for, I think it was a few months at least, to basically really investigate time without clock time. So really looking at the biological time, psychological, and how that affects and impacts on the body. So this piece then it subsequently became a 16-minute silent video piece of me meditatively walking extremely slowly in and out of this cave. And actually this was a really transformative piece for me. It was really powerful for me personally. But the projection piece was played in real time. There was no editing of the time. So the viewer actually sat for in and around 4 or 5 minutes watching completely nothing happen, which kind of tested the viewer's patience, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to kind of make them aware that we're very led by time and that there is other modes that you can explore. So this piece really, again, was very, very important. So this is it installed. I installed it on a curved wall. I had again began reading more about time, and I studied the Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking at the time, and I kind of adapted this way of working, of reading and drawing at the same time. And basically, I used drawing to understand and to kind of kind of grasp the concept or grasp the emotion or thought behind the writing. And this actually leads then on to how I make my prints and my drawings and my paintings. They're all very, they're coming from readings or thoughts, but they're expressive. They're me trying to figure out an emotion or, you know, that type of thing. So the curved wall was actually a mark I had made while reading Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, where it is actually his diagram or him explaining the diagram of the beginning or the Big Bang, this beginning of time to the collapse. So I drew basically an arc, and I repetitively drew the arc, trying to understand and how this theory could possibly be, how he could even think of this. So it became a curve, and the piece was then projected onto a curved screen. So then I kind of moved on, and this is my master's final show. It was called The Moon Understands What It Means to Be Human. And it was a 2-part installation. One room was this one here, which was very much kind of embodying, again, more theory, but it was Freud's theory of the subconscious. So the projector is projecting onto brick, which symbolized the body, the physical body. And then I'll show you in a second, it's actually projecting a manipulated 35mm film photograph, which then there's a piece of glass on top, and the light is from the projector is hitting the glass and illuminating the text piece on the back wall. So the text piece is a poetry piece that I had written, again, trying to understand time and the kind of the poetry behind seasonal time. I had kind of started to move more into the landscape and seasonal time, the moon and tides as well. So that's the left-hand side of the installation. The right-hand side of the installation then was a moon video. Again, real time, the viewer watched the moon cross the sky in real time, again, to kind of symbolize or kind of ask the viewer actually to take time to really kind of make time for this piece and this piece alone, not to kind of be rushing or checking their watch, or, you know, really just slow down. So this is a detail of it. But this is the piece, this is the photography piece. So it is a landscape flipped, inverted. Again, the physical, kind of to represent the physical body. And then the black dots were another layer of 35mm film wedged on top. And it was to symbolize the subconscious or the fleeting body. So kind of almost like a portrait or a self-portrait of a body, but in a lot more abstract form than I would have ever thought of. It's one of the moon and I, the video piece. That was 9 minutes long, and it was a blood moon. It was absolutely fascinating to shoot and to show. It was stunning to watch. The other part of the master's installation was a sound and performative video. So the whole installation was a 2-room that was connected together, but it was actually at the end, the very end of a very long corridor. So the viewer, before they even got to the space, could hear the calling of the the sound, calling them down into the dark space. And basically this performance piece, Corrupt the Innocence or Disturb the Swaying Mantle of Silence, was again playing off the idea of the time is piece. And it was a hypnotic body going down into the earth, but this time it was more to do with the internal. The viewer was brought in to the space down underground with the subject. And again, it was very hypnotic. The sound was quite enchanting. And again, it was to kind of dissociate the viewer from the outside world and just stop and think for a second of the time that they are in currently. So after the Masters, I was lucky enough to be awarded the Fingal Arts Graduate Award. And this was in partnership with Block T. And this period of time really, for me, I kind of proposed that I wanted this to be a reflective time, to kind of take a moment to look back at all my work that I had done and to kind of see where I was going. So this is the point where I actually took out my print portfolio. And I was kind of like, okay, I do want to get back into the print department. But again, I hadn't made any prints. I was more obsessed with the repetitious time, labor involved. And I think that's what held me to the print department, but not actually make any prints. It was the idea of the, I guess, of the act of printmaking. So this award really got me to stop and to look. And it was the first time I had ever applied for the RHA with a print. So I had never shown print works before publicly. And then I also decided to apply for graphic at the same time. So that was kind of this year was really me kind of thinking about what I'm going to do next. And so that was one part of the award. And then the second part of the award was a solo show. So I needed to kind of think towards that. And I really had in mind, again, the Fermat's piano piece, purely for the site-specific nature of it. I really enjoyed it. It could only be in that space. And so I chose Swords Castle, which is I'm from Swords, so it's very local to me, but it's also historic. So that was like the location that I had chosen. And I knew I wanted to do something to do again with sound, but this time with no visual. So being interested in time, sound is very, very different than sound and visual, because you are really asking a lot of the viewer to stay put and kind of make their own visuals, because I'm not giving you any. You are really kind of testing. So I came across this picture, and it was of two scientists again, and it wasn't the image or the scientists or the fact that they were in a lab that interested me. It was actually the sign on top of them that really got me thinking. I was like, why would they have a sign that says "talk softly, please" in a lab? It kind of was like, I don't get it. So I then obviously did some more research, and I came across the idea that what they were working with was microsonically very sensitive, and the idea that the scientists' voices could greatly impact their environment and the materials that they were working with. So I kind of took that as a springboard for my sound installation and the site-specific nature of the Swords Castle. So, excuse me. So the sound piece at Swords Castle was very, very silent. There was a lot of pauses, but then there was also extreme noise that shook the building, that shook the windows, purposely to kind of make you aware of where you were, which was very, very interesting. So this is just images of the piece. I had text piece or poetry piece in it as well. And I also had 30 durational paintings, which had kind of been born from me bringing back my portfolio, my print portfolio, and kind of exploring that visual language and reading and making marks as I read. So they were very much like diary entries that I kind of laid flat out for the viewers to see. I didn't give any kind of indication as to what they were. They were very much just almost small little indications or small little visuals so that they could focus on while the sound was completely silent. Some of them are completely clear. I washed off a lot of the paint after, almost like erasing the thoughts or the memory that I had of that day. So very minimal. My language was quite minimal for print, paint, and for drawing. So this is kind of just a detail view of it. I had also a small sculptural piece on the floor, which was made of plaster, and I purposely made it very brittle so that if it were to be walked too close to or anything like that, it would collapse, and that was totally fine. During my exhibition, Fingal Arts Council had their 5-year plan launch, and it actually was hit and it collapsed and it broke. But it was lovely because after that launch had happened, the broken kind of dust pieces off of the plaster had been left. So the traces of the person had been left because they had interfered or made their mark on the space without them even knowing. But it was just, for me, I really, really enjoyed that kind of concept, that you could maybe not really realize that you're making an impact on your environment. So just think of that. So my printmaking practice then, as I said, kind of leads a lot from reading and mark making and thoughts. So this is kind of what my visual language looks like. And my printmaking practice prior to Fermat's Piano was based a lot on photography of the landscape, which I went out with a film camera and also a pinhole camera. So you can see the top one is a kind of a dissolve of the landscape. So I was kind of trying to almost abstract the landscape. I didn't really know why, but this is what I was kind of compelled to kind of make. But subsequently, when it was transformed into printmaking, it was that repetitive submission or submersion into the acid bath and swaying it in the acid that really then reignited the repetitious, laborsome kind of thing that I was interested in. The bottom right-hand drawing is the drawing I was talking about that I had produced while I was reading the Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. So that's the drawing that I made multiple drawings while reading, which has, as I said, stayed with me. These are just some of my printmaking. My prints that have only recently I've started to show publicly. I don't know why I kind of held them to myself. It was almost like I didn't want to let them go for some reason. They were quite personal. But that's kind of what the visual language translates to from the pinhole photography. So kind of leading up now to 2020, and I was lucky enough to be awarded the Fingal Arts Bursary. And what I had in mind for the bursary was print, pure print, nothing else, no sound installation, no nothing. And I actually had the 60-year of graphic in mind when I applied. And I wanted to basically use the whole of 2020 to experiment with just the idea of having one print at the end. So to start that process, I looked at the title that the show had been given, which was Diamond Point. And I kind of solely focused on the word diamond. And I started looking at the potential behind the word and the words that are associated with diamond. And I actually became more interested in the opposite. So irregular, murky, earthy, soft edge, dark kind of objects. And I came across this guy, Proteus, which is one of Neptune's 14 moons, and only was recently discovered because it is so dark in the solar system that it was missed. So I found that really, really interesting that something could be so huge in the solar system but be missed because it's not shining brightly. So it was kind of almost a nod to the imperfect, or kind of acknowledging that it's not, you don't always have to be perfect, and with printmaking you certainly need to be open for mistakes and errors and that type of thing. So this piece really for me was kind of a nod to that, and to kickstart my visual language in printmaking. But sadly COVID had a different idea. I did get into the studio on our designated days to make it, but sadly that's kind of where my printmaking for the year kind of finished, purely because of COVID. But I was grateful for Neve and Robert for allowing me to do some editioning work with you guys, to kind of get more of a feel for the studio. But as you see from this piece, there's a lot of small indentations, etched lines, which again were a lot more repetitive, which I did employ within the print itself. I show a lot of details even on my on the show or the presentation, because I purely want people to look at the small details. I want to make people aware of the little overlooked things that they may not take into account. So this is not the full print. It's just a small little close-up just to show you the details of the work. And as you can see, there's small little repetitious circles and arcs and stuff like that, which again carries through. So once COVID hit and I set up a little home studio, something that kind of caught my attention was the water. It's the ocean and the sea is sadly just that small bit outside my 5K, which is very, very annoying. So I made a series of paintings exploring the movement of water, and that repetitious meditative state in which I found myself making these was bliss throughout COVID. It has really been nice to be able to go inward and express motion and emotion through making and mark making. So my notebooks, as Neve said, she's interested in, as I kind of mentioned with the solo show, they're very much diaries, but they're not handwritten. They're not written diaries as such. They're visual emotion, fleeting notices of say sunlight or a little dust particle that floats by. I draw that emotion that I see or that I feel when something small in time happens to me. So they're very, very personal, but they're always there. I go through a lot. I think a lot. So I go through a lot of notebooks. And so that's kind of where I am now. I'm still at the home studio, making print or making paintings, which actually I've never painted before. So since COVID, I picked up a paintbrush. So I'm by no means a master at anything, but I'm really, really enjoying that kind of focus and just getting in touch with myself, because I can't really do anything else. So yeah, that's kind of my practice and where I am at currently.
Really, really lovely talk. Thanks so much, Michelle, for all those amazing insights. I'm sure people have loads of questions. I've just got one kind of, it's almost an observation, but the marking time thing is, it's been there since before COVID, and it's really interesting concept. But I'm just wondering, like, everyone seems to be marking time at the moment. We're all here marking time with no kind of endpoint. It's almost like being in some kind of, like, it's like a prison sentence where we don't know the end. And I'm just wondering, has that come into your, during lockdown, has the marking of time or the passing of time, has that changed in any way since you were doing it back before all this happened? Or?
Ooh, that's a good question. Has it changed? It has changed in a sense of the medium has changed, but I think it's kind of stayed the same. I haven't had any difficulties kind of being able to make work, which I feel quite lucky to be able to kind of continue. I've no kids or anything like that, so I'm able to just solely throw myself in and mark my day.
Yeah, so your practice hasn't changed, I guess. You've been able to.
Yeah, I mean, my practice has changed slightly, as in obviously I'm not able to do any installation work or anything like that, and I would draw a lot of inspiration from the landscape and being in, immersed in woodland, or as I said, on the beach.
Yeah.
And at nighttime, I love moon watching. It's something really, really fascinating. Now, obviously, I can do it from home, but I do like to do it from Hothead normally. But again, outside my 5K, so I have to kind of.
You said that you kind of went from printing to painting over lockdown, and I've actually done the same. I was wondering how you're kind of finding it. As like it's such a different medium compared to printing,
Yeah. Funny enough, printmaking makes you slow down a lot, and painting has kind of brought an immediacy, like drawing does, but it's almost kind of made me think of different mediums within printmaking that you can adapt that to. So carborundum, for example. So I have a few carborundum plates ready to go, so whenever we do get in. So the transition has been I mean, it's been different, but the flow, I'm used to working with spit bite, so the flow of printmaking or that type of printmaking and painting isn't too dissimilar for me. So it's kind of been okay, but the change has been, it's kind of like everybody else. You kind of have to just adapt.
It's interesting, actually, the like you talk about spit bite, and for people who don't know, that's where you're painting on with the acid on the plate, and you get an almost like a watercolory soft mark, and it's the kind of thing that in painting is super quick. And then when you're doing it on a copper plate, like it takes half an hour, 45 minutes to just get one sort of seemingly fluid, quick looking mark, so it's quite an interesting observation in the context of your work.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating. Spit bite can be definitely frustrating, especially when I want like a pure solid black. That's that can take multiple goes.
Tricky mistress. Yeah, absolutely.
Looking at the painting there, obviously you've introduced a huge element, and that's color, more so than you would have been using before. And how are you finding that?
Yeah, that I'm not going to lie, I was scared of color for a very long time. Being introduced to the printmaking department in NCAD in undergrad, I didn't touch color at all. It was very black and white, and I used black and white photography, and I wore black all the time, and it was just no color whatsoever. So color is definitely something that is very new to my practice, but I tend to be very methodical with the way that I choose my color. I don't just choose a color because it's handy. I definitely have to think about everything. Everything for me has to have a reason, a why, a concept. And that's just the way that I work, and I find that it makes most sense to me. So deep rich blues, again symbolizing water or the midnight sky, that type of thing, is very much kind of creeping in now. But it's, again, only since I've started painting really that's crept in, and it's subsequently leading into or creeping into my printmaking practice.
You talk a lot about scientists and writers that have inspired your work, but are there any artists that like you'd always kind of look at and that you'd refer back to?
Yeah, I only really recently actually copped that it was all scientists that I was looking at. It was just kind of a thing that I did, and I was like, oh my God, they're all scientists. But the artist that I would definitely look at would have been Agnes Martin. and Side Tumbly, just for the immediacy and the repetitious marks that they make, and the huge large scale, which I never ever have done. I've never done anything large, simply because my notebooks are so personal. My work translates to quite personal, and I stay within like almost like a notebook page format. So those are the two artists that I really admire with their visual language. David Quinn, and the Irish artist David Quinn as well. And then for science purposes, Katie Patterson. For my master's thesis, I wrote about her work, and she has a project ongoing for the next 100 years to do with a forest that she's currently building to make a library, because in 100 years, she's not sure if we're going to have books. And so she wants to make a library there accessible for the next generation. So she would be very much someone I would look towards as well. She has nothing to do with printmaking at all. She's an installation artist. But yeah, they're the kind of the main four that I would kind of look towards.
Great, thanks. And I just have one more question. You use pink a lot, like that really soft pastel-y pink. Is that where does that come from? Seeing as you said that the blues come from the sea and the sky.
Again, that was kind of a surprise to me. I think it was a shade of the sunset that I had seen, and again, it was probably pulled from the sky. That color. I had a series kind of during lockdown of exploring that kind of pink, which after a while I absolutely hated, which I think is a good thing, because you need to go through ebb and flows of loving and hating your work to develop and make it stronger. But that was definitely a shade of the sky that I had seen, which I take note of a lot, and I take a lot of photographs of passing clouds and stuff like that, things that are ephemeral around me, which I kind of can choose the colors from. But I'm mostly interested in the transitional times of night, and where it's dusk, so darker kind of colors that I'm most interested in.
I'm just wondering, Michelle, do you have any particular advice for people who are just finishing up college now? What did you focus on that you felt has really made a difference?
Yeah, I definitely think having some sort of direction or plan, and I don't mean like big plans. I mean like, either if you're in a printmaking department, to join a printmaking studio, don't let it go. Like, don't give yourself, like, as you say, like a year out or 2 years out, because the likelihood of you going back, it gets harder. And it was another reason why I did the master's straight after, was I wanted to keep in that rhythm, and I wanted, again, rhythm or repetition, but I wanted to keep in that kind of that flow. I worked towards, I guess I worked towards making more proposals, and kind of trying to get a grip of my practice from a theory point of view to write proposals. So if that kind of makes sense, to kind of, the art making is important, but the why, for me, really, you need to understand to kind of push forward and be able to have momentum to keep going. Because I found with my undergrad class, or for me, when I was in the undergrad, I was kind of getting a little bit deflated, and it was kind of time for me to evaluate what I needed to do next in order to keep going. So a plan, like a small but unrealistic plan, but for me it was applying for the award and applying to Graphic. They were my two goals as such, that I had set for myself, and then to apply for funding, and all that came afterwards. But definitely to just keep in touch with your medium as such was very, I would say, important.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks. That was brilliant. It might be two questions, actually. I love your work. I really love it. I love how minimal it is, and I love how it relates to landscape in this kind of stretched apart way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not directly, it doesn't look like something landscapey, I guess, which I really love. And I wanted to know how you approach landscapes, because you know, with the cave and the night sky and that, kind of how landscape features in it. And then my second question, which might also be related to it, is how would collaboration inform your work, or do you see your work in any way collaborative, or is there a future collaboration that you would be interested in doing, or do you see it as a collaboration between you and the what you're kind of looking at?
So how I would, your first question was, how do I approach?
Yeah.
So I'm very, people say I'm quite a deep thinker, and quite philosophical in my thoughts. So how I kind of approach the landscape is quite poetic, and I will take notes or photographs of the landscape that I find interesting, or that spark kind of deeper thought, which I will then go and reflect on. So I don't ever work directly from the landscape. I don't go out with a sketchbook or anything like that. And it's always like an after kind of digestion, I guess, of what I've seen, and then I output after, almost like kind of trying to understand the world around me. It's a very complex place that we're in, and it's like, I guess that's why I need to go out in order to gain those thoughts and then come back. So that's kind of a thing that I've kind of struggled a little bit with lockdown. Is I love my 5K, but I need more. Secondly, your second question, I hope that answered a little bit of it. The collaboration, I have never collaborated other than the Fermat's piano piece. But I think because I haven't collaborated up to now is because it's been very personal, and it's almost like you're working through things yourself, and you don't need, or not that you don't need other people, but it's like it's hard to let other people in to a space in which you are trying to understand yourself. So I would definitely say that I've kind of gotten to that stage now where I understand what I'm doing, and therefore I would be open to seeing what happens with bringing another voice in and kind of bouncing ideas, or creating a piece with another artist. I would be very interested in doing some sort of sound installation outside. I see a lot of collaboration with me in the landscape, if that makes sense.
Love your work. Thank you. It's really interesting and thought-provoking. And I'm just wondering, now that you're working from home, do you have a structure to your day? I know when you're going into the studio, you kind of are probably working to a timetable, and but it's different when you're at home. Your time is your own. And also the work that you're doing at the moment, your paintings, will that connect to your print work when you go back to the studio? Will the paintings that you're doing now transfer into prints at some stage?
I'd love to say I had a structure to my day, but I really don't. I mean, it works in ways. It's good to not have a structure in certain aspects, because I can find sometimes working to too strict a schedule can be a recipe for artist block, and where you kind of go, oh, I can't create. I often get my most deepest thoughts at nighttime, kind of like that in between time before after dinner and before you go into bed. That's the time in which my brain is like, okay, let's go. So in a way, that's loosely my schedule of, I kind of allow my brain to be on at that time. But throughout the day, then I'm taking in my environment during the day. So part of my schedule is just to be, and just to kind of allow things to impact on me, and I note them, or I use my notebook to work them through. But usually nighttime is kind of when I start kind of making. So I find it interesting, actually. My studio at home is actually in the kitchen. It is just a desk at the kitchen, but at the morning time, once I've done work at nighttime, I leave it obviously there to dry or whatever, and then I come down in the morning and the sunlight is illuminating it, which I then look at it again in a different way. So I'm quite interested in that in also ways. But in relation to the painting and printmaking, as I said earlier, I'm actually kind of starting to make carborundum plates to bring into the studio, as I kind of find that the immediacy of the carborundum will translate well from my paintings, but I'm cautious to not have a painting and want to turn it into a print. I never really, I don't like that idea, because you kind of almost have a fixation that you need it to look like the painting, which they're totally different mediums, and you kind of need to not have that, to be able to just let go and into the process, or into the printmaking process, because printmaking has so many different variables that you need to be open-minded when you go into the studio. So I'll have the paintings there as kind of reference, but carborundum is where it's going to be at for me, I think, going forward.
Can I ask you about the medium you're using in your paintings? They seem to have lovely surface, lovely texture to them.
So my paintings have multiple layers. I mean, I again use them like notebooks, but I never change the page. So I continuously use the same surface over and over and over and over and over again. So there'll be little details or hidden little suggestions of the painting prior left seen, kind of like a palimpsest. There's that history is kind of left on the surface. So the texture is actually built up from multiple days, weeks of painting on the same surface. So I've only recently started to use oil. So the painting that you're seeing at the moment is oil and oil stick. But yeah, they're quite heavily layered, and I also wash off paint as well. Kind of like a clearing of the day. If I've had a bad day, I actually physically wash the paint off, which can kind of seem like a bit of a waste, but it works for me to kind of clear my head for the next day.
Hi, Michelle. I just have a question about your interest in science. A lot of the references you made, I would consider to be like quite heavy in like for just a general interest in science. So I was wondering, do you have someone in your life that maybe has sparked that interest? I know for myself, my brother would be quite interested in those kind of things, and we'd have conversations about that. So I was just wondering how you became so interested and where you find your references from.
Have you ever heard the kind of thing of when someone tells you you can't do it, you're like, I'm going to do it? So when I was in school, in secondary school, my science teacher didn't like me. For some reason, I didn't do anything to her, but she was like, you're not going to take science in the Leaving Cert. I think you'd be better off going to geography. So I kind of listened to her, kind of being that young girl. But it actually kind of stood with me when she was like, you're not going to do science. And I was like, but I'm really interested. But for some reason, I allowed her voice to dictate my path. And it kind of has only been since I've kind of taken ownership of what I should be interested in, or what I would like to be interested in, that I was like, actually, no, it is science that I'm interested in. I am very, very curious. And I think that's with a lot of artists, the curiosity is the key. You have to have that curiosity to look at things, explore things, and that for me was through science. And the project with UCD and the two collaborative the science students was just the start for me. I was immersed in the science building. Now, I don't like the clinical nature of the science building or anything like that. I do need the studio to be expressive, but it's the way that they think and how nothing is impossible to them that I just love. And that's where I kind of was like, nothing is stopping me from picking up a science book and reading it. Absolutely nothing. So I have a lot of books. I read constantly from every topic, and I grab little bits, little nuggets, and so yeah, I read a lot.